Before we start this episode, I just want to reassure our listeners that this podcast is framed within the social context, and we do believe that our country is ready for a podcast of this nature. Bearing that in mind, welcome to Political Fictions. It's a podcast that thinks our campaign could be improved if we had fewer people in military uniforms in it. My name's Corey Hazelhurst, and my unlikely coalition partner is Mark Pack. Hello, Mark.
Hello, Corey.
Given it's only May, we wanted to talk about a great film about an election campaign, which is Pablo Larraín's No, a film about a referendum in which the incumbent government tries to run on its economic success but becomes unstuck. No, not that referendum, the other one. Okay, first item on the agenda, events, dear boy. Mark, had you seen this before?
Yes, I watched it in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum, looking for some hopeful, happy stories about referendums that turned out correctly, which this one absolutely is.
I think I first found it because of a really positive review from
Mm,
Mark Kermode.
mm.
And then I have on DVD the three-pack set. So it's Pablo Larraín's, as I say, I think the third of a trilogy of films he makes about the dictatorship of General Pinochet. Are we going to call him Pinochet or Pinochet? I realize Pinochet is probably technically right, isn't it?
Given what I'm going to do to other names during this episode, I think let's not try to set our standards too high for our ability to get Chilean pronunciation correct.
Any listeners that we lost from our Danish pronunciations in Borgen are going to absolutely
Yeah.
get lost now. It's interesting, I think, from the Amazon reviews of this film that many people, most of the negative reviews of this are from parents who accidentally bought this film using the Amazon Fire Stick because their child was playing, presumably on their Amazon Fire Stick or what have you, and they were trying to get them away for shouting no, and somehow their AI voice activation thing has made them buy this film. So if you're listening to this podcast because you've accidentally bought it, can I just say you're in for a treat? You could have accidentally bought a lot of worse films. And it was Chile's first entry into the Oscars for Best Foreign Language Film, and it won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film in 2013.
Did it?
Oh, yes. I read your notes. I hadn't read, I thought it did.
I don't think it did.
Did it
I think
not?
it was only
Wow.
shortlisted.
Unbelievable.
Forgive us while we both do some rapid typing into the internet.
So this all of this gets edited out.
Oh no, this is staying in, please. So I think Amour won the 2013 Oscar, so I think it was just shortlisted.
Absolutely. Oh, Argo won. Yeah, we should do Argo.
Oh, definitely, yes.
Oh, and Zero Dark 30. Yeah, we could absolutely do. We could do a whole season on the 2013 Oscars.
And I warn you, I have one other fact-checking query somewhere else in your notes.
Oh no, absolute.
Chaos.
Oh
It's
yes, no, you're
chaos.
you're absolutely right. Yeah, he did.
Where's Malcolm Tucker when you need him?
I don't know why I thought it. I obviously can't read properly. Okay, yes, you're right. I'm all one. Which yeah, it's the Michael Haneke, isn't it? It's about a man caring for his wife with dementia, I think, isn't it?
Shades of the Iron Lady.
Yes. Okay.
Anyway,
Well,
can we get back on track?
this is absolutely derailed, isn't it? Okay. Well, all those people that have listened to this podcast for the first time because they've accidentally bought no have now switched off. So we can probably now get back to what we do best. So, synopsis of the film essentially is it's 1988. General Pinochet has governed Chile since a military coup in 1973, held a referendum in 1980 to keep himself in power, and was forced to hold a referendum which would keep him in power for 8 more years. And so there's the yes campaign, which is pro Pinochet, there's the no campaign, and they're given 15 minutes of airtime each day. And so it's the film essentially about that campaign, about how those TV spots are made.
And it is very closely based on real events. I mean, there is obviously was a lot more to the run up to how the referendum was forced on Pinochet and what happened during the election campaign than that simply those 15-minute sort of daily TV slots. But absolutely, they were a central part of the campaign. And, in focusing so heavily on that, the film, makes the necessary simplification of just zooming in on one part of the story. But I think then tells the story very well and although I'm sure people who are, say, have involved in some of the other aspects of the campaign might feel a bit left out from the film, I think fundamentally, if you watch this film, you get a pretty good and close to sort of true life version of what happened in, I nearly said Canadian, in Chilean politics in that campaign.
I might be forced to fact check that. So next item on the agenda, All the President's Men, cast and crew. As we said, it's directed by Pablo Larraín, who since then has gone on to make films like Spencer, which is about Diana, Princess Diana, and Jackie, about Jackie Kennedy, just to throw more films we might want to do into a mix. As I say, it's the third of a trilogy in films about Pinochet's dictatorship. And actually, it feels like there's been quite a few more films recently about the experience of Latin American countries under dictatorship. So again, just to throw two more into the mix. So there's I'm Still Here, which I'm pretty sure did win the Oscar last year for best foreign language film. Although now I'm doubting anything I know about foreign language films, which is an unfortunate place to be. But again, I've not seen it, but that is about the disappearance
And
of someone.
yeah, and I'm trying to remember the Argentinian film I saw a couple of years ago about trying to bring people who were responsible for some of the disappeared to justice, which is an excellent film. So good I've forgotten its name, unfortunately, but a really gripping drama. But
And
I
one
think
that
what's interesting about the director's trilogy is I've not seen the other two in the trilogy, but I've seen, for example, the trailers. And the trailer for one of them is all about the central character being a huge fan of John Travolta's character in Saturday Night Fever and sort of dressed up like him. And it almost looks like it's a film about a John Travolta tribute act. So I don't know how political are the other two in the trilogy.
Saturday Night Fever, of course, won Best Foreign Language Film at the Oscars in 1977. Yeah, I'm not sure. And I think the other one, see the one about Scarface, I think, is about.
Mm,
And again, we're recording this before the Oscars are announced, but I think one of the films that's come out this year, which has had quite rave reviews, again about the Brazilian dictatorship, that period of military rule, is The Secret Agent,
mm.
which has had some really great reviews. And this film, oh yeah, right, okay, I've just found your other query. So the film's originally based on a stage play, but I'm not sure if it ever was performed. Because actually, yes, I think you're right to query that.
So I think in one of the interviews on the DVD extra with, I think it's the lead actor says that the play was never performed. So I'm fairly confident on that front.
Yeah, I think that's right. Actually, I think I've got that messed up. So yeah, but it does have quite a few famous, I think, Chilean actors on stage and screen as well. So I suppose best known actor probably in this, who I think has done some more mainstream
Mm.
work outside sort of Spanish language stuff, is Gael Garcia Bernal, isn't it? Who plays the sort of head marketing guy for the No campaign.
Yeah, and the role that he plays is a sort of composite of two characters in real life. One of whom, Eugenio Garcia, who was the actual campaign creative director, has a small cameo in this film himself as well. And I think that's a theme that runs through the casting a little bit because there are several actors who acted in adverts for the No campaign in real life who also appear in this movie acting various parts. And apparently, at one point, the director toyed with the idea of getting those actors to act being the actors that they really were. But then in the end, decided that would all be a little bit too meta and self referential. But Eugenio Garcia's cameo role survives into the film. And I guess the other person who is a quite fun sort of callback to real life in the film is Patricio Aylwin, who's the first democratically elected president of Chile, who plays himself in the movie, as
So
indeed does the TV presenter.
yeah, who plays himself sort of 20 years
Mm.
before. So there's a nice throwaway lesson about how good the makeup is, and it sort
Yeah,
of has to be because he'd obviously this film's 2012.
mm.
He'd been on TV before
Yeah,
the coup in the
mm.
60s,
Mm.
and then he's playing himself in 2012, but playing his 1988 self.
Mm.
Again, films we should make when we have a sprawling media empire, Mark. In 20 years' time, we could do the same with a Brexit referendum, couldn't we? So we could try and get Dominic Cummings to play George Osborne in the
Yes.
In
Speaking of improbable links like that, though, there a Ricky Gervais link to one of the actors as well in this movie?
Yeah, so Guy plays the campaign chairman, Aritia, I suppose. So he's a really good presence in this. And again, sort of not only having to look, as we're going to talk about this, heard this incredibly kind of madcap coalition of parties, all the way from the sort of Christian Democrats to the Marxist parties and anything in between. But also kind of having to look after his staff given what's happening to them as a result of the referendum. So he's I think a bit of a staple of Chilean television and plays the Ricky Gervais role in the Chilean version of The Office.
In a way, as a tribute to the range of his acting skills, because I think unless the Chilean version of The Office is very, very different, that Ricky Gervais character is completely different from the campaign chairman role, who is sort of quite a calming, organized, respected figure. All of the things the Ricky Gervais character can only dream of being.
Although I'm now obviously in our Brexit film, Ricky Gervais will play Dominic Cummings, I think. And Gael Garcia Bernal, so he spends a lot of time in Santiago, so they'd have a convincing Chilean accent. As you might have guessed from my pronunciation, I'm not really qualified to speculate on how good his Chilean accent is, but it sounded pretty convincing to me.
Do you want to know a fun fact about him in the film?
I do want a fun fact.
He had a bit of dispute with the sort of prop team as to whether the skateboard that he uses in the film was the right size or not, because he claimed his memory of skateboards, at that era, was that they were a different size from the one that he was provided with, and the prop team insisted no, it's the right size skateboard.
I didn't know skateboards had changed size.
Oh.
But presumably, if he's remembering the past, then it would have felt bigger anyway.
Well, indeed. So he is quite a short person, and he made, in the interview with him that I saw, he made a very good joke about this, because the interviewer says that, well, maybe you've grown since then, so it's, it seems smaller. And he pointed out, well, actually, look, I've not grown very much, have I?
It's not a bad joke.
He delivered it somewhat better than me, but then he is the lead actor in a film that was, shortlisted for an Oscar, whilst I have not been, outrageously.
Not yet. When you play David Cameron in this Brexit film we're going to do in 20 years' time, it'll be great. There's a really good character. The maid's a really good character in this who says very little, but I think does show a shift in attitude in the film about a certain demographic. So, a bit of a shout out there. Next item on the agenda. Art the Possible. Are there any similarities between this film and real events? In Chile, this film got quite mixed reviews. I was surprised about it. So, as you've said, the campaign very much focuses on the marketing side of it, on the 15-minute TV spots. What it doesn't so much focus on is the sort of grassroots organising. So the referendum was only going to take place among registered voters. To vote in the referendum, you needed an ID card, which was the equivalent of $5, which I suppose was quite a lot of money in comparatively, and you had to get on the electoral roll, which was quite an onerous process because Pinochet destroyed all the registration rolls. Lots of civil society organisations, so Civitas, ran a nationwide campaign to try and register all the Chileans who wanted to vote but weren't able to. They wanted to try and put public service announcements on, pay for TV adverts, but those were sort of undermined by the regime. And so that was one of the things that was seen as being that grassroots role was seen as being a big part of the reason why the referendum was successful, as well as the TV coverage. And we've done episodes on This House which are really interesting, and also Election. They're both film fictions which in their different ways cover that kind of nuts and bolts paraphernalia of politics quite well. You could easily see how you could have a film that also has a lot of tension and drama in the story of trying to sign people up to register to vote.
And there's a whole load of other aspects, in terms of the international pressure, which was very important in bringing about the referendum in the first place, and probably also in it being run in a reasonably fair way. There is the whole story about the politics amongst the government. And, in the end, Pinochet, spoiler, loses the referendum and does exit power peacefully. But there's a whole load of politics around that doesn't get a look in. But I do think, for a campaign where there were 15-minute slots from each side on TV every day for what was it, just fractionally under 4 weeks. It's reasonable enough to focus in on that side. I mean, there are perhaps fewer nods than some people might like to the existence of these other factors, particularly the grassroots organising. But the complexity of the internal politics of the 17-party coalition, I think it's fair enough that, for example, is massively simplified to basically one grumpy person in a meeting in one scene. But that does it, it tells you the core part of that story reasonably well.
There were so many different Marxist parties
Is that the Groucho Marx, the Karl Marx, and the Marx and Spencer's party?
absolutely. I think you're right about the sort of American pressure. So I think it was the National Endowment for Democracy, which I think is sort of, is that a CIA sort of funded? I think they provide like $1 million for the No campaign. I think something that made this a much more emotional watch for me than watching it in 2012 is the fact that you have an America which is putting pressure on. I guess Chile was an American ally, wasn't it, in the 80s, but was putting pressure on that regime to have a fair and free referendum and transfer of power. You can a lot of the film and the tension towards the end of the film is about whether not only will No win, but also will Pinochet accept the results.
Oh, you think there's tension in the film? We will come back to that.
There is drama derived maybe from that. Whereas, as you say, what sounds like essentially was having many members of the junta thought that Pinochet shouldn't have been on the ballot. They should maybe have had a civilian candidate. And so, therefore, when the result comes through, there are enough elements within the regime who think that Pinochet should stand aside.
So, although, the film doesn't really get into all of those sort of internal politics within the dictatorship, I mean, there are a few scenes that feature multiple senior politicians or senior military figures, from the government. And although they don't feature very much, I think you do get more of a sense of reality than perhaps you'd get from, say, the cabinet scenes in The Iron Lady, thinking back to a film that we've reviewed previously, where the cabinet ministers during Margaret Thatcher's time are really caricatured. And I'm not sure the cabinet meetings really give you very much of a steer of what was really happening in British politics at the time. Although they are brief, you do get a bit of a sense of that from the junta meetings. The other thing that features, which I think feels quite anachronistic in a way, but I quite enjoyed, was genuine clips of celebrity endorsements at the time for the No side in the campaign. So they use the actual footage. These are all genuine endorsements. One of them is Jane Fonda, a globally very well known and very controversial, but with many people popular figure, sort of, in her time. One of them is Christopher Reeve, who at the time of this referendum is well known for being Superman. Rather amusingly, at least I thought, and apologies to any Richard Dreyfuss fans listening, Richard Dreyfuss is the third. I do think Jane Fonda, Christopher Reeve, Richard Dreyfuss. With all due respect to Richard Dreyfuss, he is the more surprising of the trio. The only thing I can try to figure out is that he had, I think, the year before appeared in a political satire that had bombed, where he played a spoof dictator of a Latin American country. So I don't know, maybe the film, although sort of globally was a failure, perhaps it was successful in Chile or in South America, more generally, and therefore it made sense. You do sort of think, if you're going to pick a trio and you've got Jane Fonda and Superman as your first two, you could maybe go somewhere else rather than Richard Dreyfuss for number three. Or how I'm being unfair on him, was Richard Dreyfuss a major figure in 1980s geopolitics that I'm dissing unfairly?
I think it's pretty clear that No wouldn't have won without the Richard Dreyfuss endorsement. So I think this is a massive travesty. I'm only speculating. Maybe Pablo Larraín is a big Richard Dreyfuss fan, because there were other celebrity endorsements that they could have used. One of which was Sting.
Oh, really? No, wow. I didn't know that Sting did a. Well, it sort of fits in with that vibe of sort of Christopher Reeve, Jane Fonda, Sting. You can imagine all three of them at some charity do at some point, can't you, in the late 80s as well?
I'm losing my sense of reality and what is true, what I'm saying is true or not.
But dear listener, there have been 9 claimed facts at this point edited out so far.
What I find most disturbing is how you're putting them on a chalkboard behind you, and sort of how Rich is, I feel, kicking a man when he's down. But so the reason I bring up Sting is that one of the advert. So that, again, we'll talk later about the footage of the actual adverts and the spots that the No campaign used. So one of them is Chilean women who are dancing in memory of their loved ones, and so it might be their husbands or their partners or their brothers who had disappeared by the regime. And that's sort of happening even in the late 2010s. That sort of dance was still happening by the women in question. And the idea is that the dance they're doing is a romantic dance, but they're having to do it on their own to sort of emphasize the fact that their loved one isn't there. And apparently Sting's written a song about that. I can't remember if it was written for the campaign itself, but he definitely wrote a song at the time about this going on, which I think is why. So it did feature, I think, in some of the No campaign material, as well as the spots of the politics. The Gael Garcia Bernal character is still working for his advertising agency, and they're working on a soap opera. And the soap opera they're working on is a real Chilean soap opera. Bella Audacious, Beautiful and Bold, probably not something we're going to cover, along with Moon Over Parador, the Richard Dreyfuss Latin American film. Although we could do Moon Over Parador.
Let's put that low down the list. We could do a special episode on We've Watched, so you didn't have to.
At the moment, we've got quite a high rating. At some point, we're going to have to review something we really don't like. We should have covered this under Matters Arising. We have had a couple of people suggest we do Melania, which might require a stiff drink.
That suggestion has been carefully filed. Speaking of such characters, maybe we should move on to the Phil Wallace Award.
Absolutely. Jane Fonda, obviously. So who is the most evil or Machiavellian character in this film?
The murderous dictator is the obvious choice in terms of Pinochet. The way he's portrayed in the film is interesting, isn't it? Is, I think, in a reflection of the fact that the referendum was a genuine contest, and although in the end the no side won, and it won clearly, it didn't win an overwhelming landslide. I think the film does a good job of reflecting why many people will have voted for Pinochet without, just sort of excusing all of his flaws. I think, you do get a little bit of a nuanced picture of Pinochet, which is necessary because otherwise you can't really understand, well, why did so many million people in a relatively free vote, vote for him? I mean, I guess the character who's meant to be the sort of evil, manipulative one is Guzman, the boss at the advertising firm of the chap who runs, the advertising for the No campaign, and he is supporting the Yes campaign. I think we're meant to believe that he's stolen from his colleague's office at some point details of what the Yes campaign is going to broadcast. But in the end, I don't think he was that evil a character, because although he clearly, A, was in the wrong in backing Pinochet, and B, does indulge in some dirty tricks, he also at one moment does use his connections with the police to get the partner of his employee who's running the campaign on the other side to get her out of jail. He does seem to have a bit of decent humanity about him.
I think that's slightly generous on the boss. Yeah, so on Pinochet, I think you're right. And actually, Pinochet is very much in this film a bit like Richard Nixon in All the President's Men, where definitely wins the Phil Wallace Award and appears via archive footage rather than anyone.
Although I think in All
Pinochet.
the President's Men, you don't really get a sense of why Nixon won the 1972 election. In a way that I think from this movie, you do get a sense of why Pinochet managed to get within what would have been about 10% of winning the referendum, don't you?
As will be painfully clear to anyone who's listened to this, I'm not going to claim to try and be an expert on Chilean politics and Chilean history, but the impression I've got from having sort of talked to people who've spent time in Chile and doing a bit of reading afterwards, it's obviously still a very... that the nature of the coup and the nature of the regime and the way it's still debated in Chile is still quite polarizing, isn't it? So I think there's a poll that was done within the last couple of years sort of saying that 36% of Chileans thought that Pinochet had freed Chile from Marxism, as they, the hyperinflation of the Allende regime and sort of arresting that, whereas only 42% thought that the coup destroyed democracy, and that was the lowest figure they'd found for 30 years, which I think is again quite worrying. So and actually the character of the maid, as I say, she's I think at the start is pro-regime, isn't she? And they do a good job of portraying why that would be.
Mm.
Yeah, Guzman, the boss. I mean, he tries to bribe his employee to not join the campaign, doesn't he? He threatens him, threatens his son. I think, isn't there a bit of an implied threat at one point to
Yeah, I
his
mean,
son?
yeah. I mean, he is.
I know he gets the partner out of,
He's not my favorite boss. I'll grant you that. I'll grant you that. I thought it was just interesting the way he does use his connections
Hmm.
to with the police, for good. Maybe that's because also the point at which he does that, it's not obvious that the no side is going to win. If he'd done it a bit later in the storyline, you might think, oh, well, he can see which way the wind is blowing, and perhaps he's wanting to cover his bases. But uh,
Hmm.
hmm,
I think it's probably to the film's credit that there isn't this sort of. I don't feel there's a moment of redemption for him though. It's not like there's a bit where he kind of
that's
puts
true.
his.
That's
He
very
doesn't
true.
put his
Yeah.
arm around his employee and go, "Oh, it turns out you were right all along," you know. But I
And
quite
just to be
like
clear,
that.
I do think it makes you a bad boss if you threaten the son of one of your employees.
Let's move on very quickly from that to the next item on the agenda: Barack Obama's tan suit. Best and worst bits of political detail. Given we've been talking about
Bread,
Guzman,
the
the
bread,
bread.
the
Okay,
bread.
there's a good scene with baguettes in this, isn't there?
Something you can say about a surprisingly large number of films, actually, I suspect. But yeah,
Because
so
too many of them are French, Mark. I
the
think
No
probably.
campaign is filming a little clip of people having a picnic for one of its TV slots. Everyone gets very irate that no, this is the wrong type of bread. There are baguettes. It can't have baguettes. Gotta have. I think they're called marraqueta and panmasando, sort of two very distinctive Chilean types of breads. Got to have them in the basket instead and not baguettes. And actually, they can't find them, so they have to stick with the baguettes in the end. And and at first, I thought, well, this is a little bit of a weird, why the baguettes suddenly become a thing. But then, having read up a little bit on Chilean bakery and baking traditions,
Sorry.
it's sort of a bit like the equivalent if we were looking at a film about British politics and there was a scene in which somebody was saying, no, that's the wrong dog. We've got to get a bulldog in. The particular marraqueta is very symbolic of Chilean culture, and there is in fact a Chilean saying about how you're born with a marqueta under your arm, which is sort of like a more middle class version of the saying of being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. So I thought and it's one of the things that the film does really well is it has those little brief moments that tell you a much bigger story very effectively. So once you know enough about bread to understand that scene, and of course the movie's predominantly made for an audience that will have done that. There's a lot packed into that about how the No campaign was trying to tap into a patriotic, nostalgic, warm view of the country.
Yeah, there's a whole fussing, isn't there, about is it the baguettes and nobody eats them here, and actually, so the way it works is that it sort of shows you these shots being presented, and then you see the video, and then you realise, well, all this fuss is for literally a 2 second clip, if that, of a
But
family
that's what
having a
TV
picnic.
ads are like. I mean, the
Mm,
amount of effort that goes into fake lettuce for hamburger ads to make them look, it
yeah.
look wonderfully green and crispy and all of that. That's exactly what TV advertising is like, and that's presumably part of the filmmaker's thought in having a scene which revolves around a little piece of detail like that.
Yeah, and I suppose it's almost the British thing of, yeah, what would you have in a British picnic in this kind of
Yeah.
thing? I guess scones maybe or afternoon tea or actually that's a bit twee,
I
isn't
can
it?
just imagine some Michael Tucker type scene about no, not jam or cream, jam or cream. Is this gonna is this gonna be seen in Cornwall or Devon? Which way around have we got to do it? It's the other thing that really caught my eye, which but will have been completely unexceptional to Chilean audience for this film because it's just how things are in Chile. But did you notice the shape of the ballot papers?
I didn't.
The
I'm sorry to
ballot
say.
papers are not rectangular. The ballot
Oh,
papers have two little tabs sticking out the side in one corner. And
hmm.
as I understand it, not being an expert in Chilean ballot paper design, those are sort of perforated and you tear off. So a bit like if you go to vote in Britain, the ballot paper is separated from a counterfoil in a sort of book of ballot papers. The counterfoil, in that sense, in Chile is the little bit that gets torn off. So part of the ballot paper is torn off before you put the ballot in the box.
And then sort of the way that they were doing it was a mark on the paper, wasn't it? So you kind of had yes and no with a mark going down vertically,
Mm.
and then essentially you'd make a plus for either your yes or your
Yeah.
no. I realized very excitingly for I imagine a certain subset of our listeners, there is a bar chart in this film.
Is this the point I should confess about what I did when the bar chart appeared on screen.
I'm here to hear your confession, Mark.
So the bar chart is of a Gallup poll, which is shown partway through, supposedly showing the Yes campaign in the lead 47% to 42%. I hit pause. I grabbed my ruler. I measured the heights of the two bars. And you know what? They are the wrong heights. The no bar has been wrongly squeezed down to make the Yes lead look bigger than it really was.
I've heard your confession, Mark. You can now make 3 John Curtises, and you are absolved of your freezing. I mean, there's so much stuff, isn't there, in the adverts? But I quite like the Yes ad where it's literally a steamroller going forward over a lamp, and then a pram, and then a TV, and then heads towards a child, and it's not very subtle messaging, but I did like
It
that.
reminded me rather of that Taskmaster episode in which they all get on a steamroller and have to squash something. But that maybe took the seriousness away for it slightly for me. The other thing, though, that again is a very good bit of sort of detail is the way there's one of the No Campaigns TV slots gets censored at one point, and there's a whole controversy as a result, which of course draws far more attention to what was going to go in the slot that had been censored than if there hadn't been any controversy in the first place. Very classic of politics, where not unknown for people to deliberately seek out problems like that in order to generate more coverage for what they've done, or in the style of the LBJ's very famous Daisy Girl ad that was run once in the US presidential election where he was up against Barry Goldwater. Hugely controversial, but so controversial that it generated so much coverage that it didn't need to be run again.
Reminds me of the sort of No to AV ad as well, of this baby doesn't need a new voting system, it needs more money in the NHS.
It needs Dominic Cummings.
Yeah, Q again, as we'll talk about, you end up spending so much time talking about the silliness of that you would just end up repeating your opponent's message. Next item, very British coup. Are there conspiracies or conspiracy theories in this film? Two, I suppose, main sort of from 2 different security services. So there's the various attempts of the regime to thwart the No campaign. And then there's the other that you sort of mentioned in your notes about the sort of role of America that we've kind of touched on previously.
Yeah, although, I mean, I think it's a film that's very light on conspiracy theories in 2 respects. One is that the conspiracies that feature in the film are sort of real conspiracies rather than conspiracy theories. And the other is, you can try to spin some conspiracy theories around, what the CIA has got up to over the years and so on. And the film doesn't really get into that because, in fact, by the time of the referendum, any sort of nefarious US influence is being exercised on the side of righteousness and democracy. I mean, obviously, earlier American interference in Chilean politics, very different. But by the time we get to this film, the CIA are not the sort of evil instigators of dictatorship, of the sort that you get all, the allegations for them, earlier in Chile's history. I guess there is a little bit of a question about whether the dictatorship thought that it was running a referendum that was in a way set up to sort of fail. But again, yeah, I think it's a pretty conspiracy light film, all things considered, isn't it?
Yeah.
The intimidation of the no side is just straightforward fact-based intimidation, rather than anything sort of whipped up as a conspiracy to make the film more dramatic, is it?
No, absolutely. So I quite like fact-based intimidation as a concept. It feels very much like the Remain campaign 2016. We're just going to put our facts on it, put our data on the table, which actually leads us quite well into the next item: how to win an election. Best and worst bits of political strategy that this film has.
Well, obviously, there is the David Cameron Augusto Pinochet combo lesson here, which is be very careful about calling a referendum because you might end up losing it.
What could possibly go wrong, Mark? Honestly,
what could possibly go wrong? Indeed, both of them felt they were under significant political pressure, to which a referendum was the way out, but it would be a successful way out because they would call the referendum and then win it. So absolutely, political lesson number 1 from the film is be very careful about calling a referendum. I think the other, on the theme of referendums, the other thing that really struck me is the slogan for the winning no side is happiness is coming. And there's a lot one can say about this. One is it's another three-word slogan that won. Take back control. Happiness is coming. Three-word slogans rule the roost. It's one of those really good three-word slogans because it's almost like it's got a story in the mere three words. It's got emotion. It's got impact. It really works well. I also love successful three-word slogans like that because they also have all of the attributes that people who don't like a particular slogan normally criticize other slogans for. So happiness is coming is vague, it's imprecise. Anyone could say, all the things that people throw at whatever slogan they don't like of their own party as criticism, you could throw at happiness is coming as well. And yet it was their very, very successful slogan. It's also, I think, and we get this a bit in the film, don't we? It takes a very clear line on a really tricky judgment about the mix of hope and fear that you should have in campaigning. And, in the context of the referendum, part of the story is some no campaigners thinking, look, we've got this rare opportunity to tell the truth on national TV to everyone about the horrors, the murders, the abuses of the dictatorship. We must do that. We must tell people about how dreadful things have been. And the line that the campaign takes in the end is, although it lets a little bit of that into its story, but say the way we're going to win is with an optimistic, positive message. Happiness is coming is the slogan. A rainbow is the logo. An upbeat jingle is the campaign song. And it's really to double down on positivity. As somebody says at one point in the film, what is happier than happiness?
They do it really, really well. And it's a really good scene that could end up being really cliched and really caricatured. But there is a real sense, and again, the campaign chair I think does it really well as well, is there's a real sense of balancing the moral obligation
Mm.
to tell this story. So the main consultant has this line like, it moves me, but it doesn't sell.
Mm.
It's very easy when you're writing a campaign to only write things about issues that you are passionate about, and also to frame those issues in ways that interest you
Mm.
and maybe appeal to your taste, but then you don't then end up framing it to people who might have a slightly different outlook on life than you.
And you see that a lot with, for example, climate change campaigners. People like Extinction Rebellion would be a good example of this. There's obviously all sorts of controversy about their tactics, but also Extinction Rebellion's basic message is there is this utter disaster coming our way, and it's all going to be completely horrific unless you do all of these massively radical things straight away. There is a different story that other environmental campaigners talk about, which is much more optimistic, that talks about how huge the switch to renewable energy has been across, many countries, that talks about how the Chinese reliance on coal powered fuel stations is beginning to drop away. There's a positive story about change succeeded, or oh my goodness, it's all an absolute disaster. And reality is obviously a mix of them. But the thing that this, I think, film brings out really clearly is if you've got a vote to win, what matters in a way is not what you feel is true, but what's going to win over the people you're trying to appeal to. But that's I think that's often a controversial choice, in, say, normal British politics. But when part of that is therefore downplaying, telling the story of the murders of innocent civilians by a dictatorship, that's a really difficult, call to make in many ways, isn't it?
Well, so I talked about the dancers before,
Mm.
and again, one of the really interesting scenes essentially is about this, where the Gael Garcia Bernal character is very much, this is something that doesn't fit their hopeful, positive message, but essentially the fact that these women have a right to be heard, that the stories of these people need to be told,
Mm.
wins the day. You could frame the argument about taking action on climate change in small c conservative terms about protecting the natural. Well, you could talk about protecting God's country. You could do it, and you could frame it in very religious terms. And instead, now you almost have this climate justice is social justice argument, which in a way, not only that sort of narrows it down to being oh, you have to agree in not just the climate change, but also in these other particular causes as well, which just does sort of narrow the field a little bit.
And
However
I think
laudable
what
I
we
think that
see,
is.
and I think what we see in the movie is this explored through the idea that there are two particular groups that the No campaign needs to appeal to. So one is young voters who might be apathetic. The risk is not so much of them about them voting yes, but it's about them not voting at all. And therefore, in a way, the more you talk up fear, the greater the chance they feel either scared about participating or that it's pointless because the dictatorship is just going to carry on dictating. So there's the young people to appeal to. And then also there's the maid and other older women
Mm.
who are basically moderately content with how things are going, or at least how things are going now. And for them, the fear is, well, if you vote no and Pinochet is ousted, are things going to get worse? And so for both groups, the genius of the campaign, ably presented in the film, the genius of the Happiness is Coming campaign is that it inspires the young people while reassuring the old people, and hence can propel a victory in a way that's a really good lesson about how to win elections. The other lesson that it struck me is although the Pinochet campaign loses, it has quite a coherent message that in many other contexts is a winning message. It's your classic incumbent strategy. After years of problems, we've achieved stability and economic prosperity and don't risk it with a radical change.
I suppose in elections, there are at heart two election campaigns you run. You either run a steady as she goes or time for a change. The other interesting thing about the Yes campaign is it does get better.
Mm.
So, the first ad you see is very much a sort of recantation of the achievements of Pinochet, which is very clunky.
Mm.
And then you see it over the campaign learn from what the No campaign is doing, and they do respond to it. And there's some.
Including in quite a clever, creative way, because fundamentally, talking about a positive, upbeat campaign, happiness is coming, and therefore vote no. In any other context, you'll be saying, well, no is the wrong name for this thing. We've got to give it a positive name, an upbeat name, And the Yes campaign plays on that quite nicely, as you say, in some of its later creative work.
In a similar way that the No to OV campaign was able to make somehow no becoming this positive
Mm.
step. And even the Brexit referendum, there were debates about should it be in or out or leave and remain. And I believe I'm right in saying that the leave side like they didn't want it to be a in out on the ballot paper. It was very much a remain leave.
Mm.
But then how you make leave that sort of positive choice. As we've mentioned, there are a number of Marxist parties in this
Mm.
coalition. A lot of the talk amongst the left, just first of all, before the campaign even starts, is should you validate this kind of election that's held in an authoritarian regime? Do you boycott it? Do you try and give this a veneer of legitimacy that the regime doesn't deserve? And I think, given the liberal democratic hour we're in, that's a question that's only become more salient with time, not less. And again, I don't think it gives those views in a caricatured way, and it's not always an easy question to answer. And it's
No, I
interesting as part
think
of that.
because fundamentally, I very much disagree with that type of view. I think you have to try to appeal to the swing voters in front of you to win whatever's on offer. In the properly principled position is to be concerned about what the outcomes are and to therefore do your best to influence those outcomes. But I think the people who have a different view to that in this film rightly get a much more sympathetic and plausible treatment than, say, the people who chose to vote green in the two US presidential elections than that Trump won would deserve to get. But the fact that Trump's second election victory still involved people saying, "Oh, a plague on both your houses. You're no different from each other. I'm going to vote for someone else," shows how powerfully misguided, I would say, but how powerful that point of view can be. And one of the geniuses of the No campaign was finding a way of melding everyone from the uber pragmatist through to that sort of hardcore plague on all of you viewpoint together into an effective anti-Pinochet campaign.
Moving on to the Zeitgeist tape.
Mm.
Next item on the agenda, any production details to savour?
And perhaps the best bit about it is literally the film, as in the choice to use what is it, Sony U-matic tape, which is, as I sure you know, and as I'm sure listeners know, 3/4 inch Type E helical scan tape,
Of course, yeah.
which is not the latest, even at the time this film was made, is not the latest type of tape, but is the sort of tape that was used for TV news at the time of the referendum. That was the sort of technology being used for filming all around the world. And so the quality of the film is in that sense not that great. You know, the pictures are not as sharp, the colors are not as good. But what it means is when you switch from the film to the film's use of archival footage, if you don't get that jarring effect because they both look and feel the same. And so it melds together the fiction and the fact really well. And so if you do the foolish thing of looking at online reviews about the film, people do supposedly criticize the quality of the film, but actually I think it's far better for being on this dated stock.
It makes everything fit together so much more seamlessly than otherwise it would have done. And the camera work is quite wandering handheld, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
it's
it
sort of
reminds
almost
me
at the thick of it at times, isn't it?
yeah.
I guess we do also get, we should have maybe slot in here a bit of a call out for the Maggie's Mysterious Milk category.
Oh yeah.
Because there is a deliberate echo in several places of the very famous Coca-Cola We Are the World TV ad, which was a huge global thing. And that, there are various sort of almost callbacks to that in different bits of the advertising that we see in the film, which I think is deliberate because that was such a sort of a creative milestone, that ad.
If I'm honest, I didn't know that it was for that advert. I thought they were referencing a kind of American Band-Aid style video. So I had no idea.
There's a reference to that in there as well,
Okay.
isn't there? And I think the reference to microwave food is done very nicely as well, because microwaves were sort of the exciting new technology that was spreading around the world.
And the way that they're just microwaving like cheese sandwiches and fruit, no.
It looks like you've got this sort of soggy white bread cheese sandwich that they're then quite excited to eat.
That was the 80s. There was nothing else to do.
You mentioned to me being excited about the close-ups of somebody's head.
But there's some really good acting in it, isn't there? Yeah. So there's a couple of scenes with really good lingering shots of Gael Garcia Bernal's head in a protest or towards the end of the film, and you can really see the emotion in his eyes. And for a film that often spends a lot of time doing a lot of handheld wavy work, which I think is a technical term, it was I think those shots were quite powerful because they weren't used very often.
Yeah, and he's got a very expressive face, hasn't he? So you've got several occasions where he is at home on his own playing with his kids' toys. And so there's no dialogue, and all you've got is what he's doing and the expression on his face. And he really pulls off those scenes. He also, at one point, which is a lovely caricature of advertising industry creatives through the years, at one point is playing with his kid's toy train and is being accused of playing rather than working. He says, no, I'm working, and that's just your classic creative. I've got to this is how I'll get the brilliant ideas, is by just playing a bit longer with this train set.
It's a good train set.
But it's a train set with a weird missile on it, isn't it? I don't know if this is a distinctive thing about Chilean train sets or South American train sets. Do they feature more missile launchers than the Hornby train sets of my youth did?
Yeah, I don't think Hornby were massive.
I
You
mean,
wouldn't
it's a missile, isn't it?
I'd not really thought about it. I mean, you probably couldn't get missiles through most tunnels in Britain, so
But there is that it is a missile that he's slotting back onto a train wagon, isn't it?
Hunter in the
I guess
80s.
it's one way to deal with traffic blocking sort of level crossings on train network. But yeah.
Final item, state of play. I got quite emotional watching this film, actually. Probably the most emotional watch so far. I think just because of the changes we've seen in politics since I watched it before, and the fact that at the moment we've got an election campaign in Hungary, which again feels like a very similar dynamic of an unlikely coalition of essentially all the opposition parties having to coalesce against a kind of long time person who's been there quite a while. The odds are stacked against the opposition. And so, in that sense, this film feels a lot more relevant now than it did when it was released, I think.
I enjoyed watching it, and it didn't feel like it dragged at all.
Mm.
But also, it's not really very dramatic. There's definitely a few moments of tension in the film, but basically, there isn't a lot made out of trying to build up the drama of who's going to win, which I guess makes sense because pretty much everyone watching the film, certainly at the time it was released, was going to know who won. It somehow manages to really keep you going through the film, despite not really having any sort of long running sort of story arc that brings tension with it. But very enjoyable, packed full of very useful practical political insights and sort of prompts to learn more. Like I now know a little bit more about Chilean bakery. So I think I enjoyed it not quite as much as All the President's Men, but I'm going to give it a 520 on our 0 to 650 score.
Yeah, I give it 5.15. So even
Mm.
I don't know. I've given it a lesser score than you, even though I probably, by the sounds of it, maybe enjoyed it a bit
Yeah.
more. So I'm not quite sure what that says about our rating system. But
I think what it says is that on average, I tend to give slightly higher scores than you.
mm,
And in fact, I can reveal exclusively that so far, our running total is I give an average of 484 and you give an average of 470.
we're very generous, aren't
Yeah.
we?
Although
Who
in the
wants?
first two episodes, you gave ranges. So I picked the midpoint in each
No,
range of your
that,
ranges for the
yeah, that's
average
fair.
calculation.
I'm gonna stop
So,
making
I'm 14 points more optimistic than you.
put that on a bar chart. And I think I wonder if a lot of the fact that they don't ham up the tension
Mm.
is because I know that Chile nominated this film for the Best Foreign Language Award, which did not win, turns out. Maybe this was a film that was made assuming it would mostly be seen in Chile itself.
Mm.
And so therefore, if they made a US remake, you can imagine them hamming the tension up a bit more. But
Yeah,
it doesn't.
and I guess it's a film that tells you why something happened.
Mm.
So you know what the outcome of the referendum was. Here is the story behind how it happened.
And you compare it to something like The Iron Lady, telling someone the story of a figure, assuming that people would know the basic outline of their life, but this does it in a far better way.
I'm
But
quite looking forward, therefore, when we get to it, to watching Death of Stalin, because obviously the title of the film very much tells you what happens in the film, and to see how I remember watching it and very much enjoying it as a film at the time that I watched it, but with having seen other things like No or rewatched and having to think more about films like No since then, to then watch Death of Stalin and figure out how do you make this an interesting, enjoyable film that you want to keep watching, even though the film's very title has told you what's going to happen.
what are we talking about next time?
Well, I have a confession to make. We
Oh
are going
no.
to stick to our original plan, which is to watch a Danish political drama called King's Game. I have, however, realised in suggesting that we watch it next time, I've made the same mistake as I made when watching it again a couple of years ago, which is it's not the film that I was thinking of. So we are going to watch it. You are going to enjoy it. But then subsequent to that, I'm going to have to find the film, or maybe it's a TV series that I was thinking of that has a brilliant bit of voiceover at the credits at the end. So, spoiler with King's Game, don't bother about any voiceovers at the credits at the end. That's from something else. I'm going to have to dig out what it was. But let's stick with the plan. King's Game it is. It is a Danish drama set just before a election is due for the Danish Parliament, and it looks like the main opposition party might win, and with its leader therefore becoming prime minister. But then something dramatic happens.
Will join us in our quest for Mark to work out which film he actually meant us to talk about in a couple of weeks.
In the meantime, please do remember to subscribe to this podcast if you've liked listening to this episode, particularly if you want to find out eventually which is the correct Danish film or TV series, or possibly not Danish, that I am endeavouring to make us watch one time. But seriously, please do subscribe, do click like in your favourite podcast app, and do tell other people about this podcast.
Thanks for listening.